What if the man you loved, the man who gave you everything, was willing to take away the one thing that mattered most? For Elara Vance, wife of billionaire tech mogul Damian Sterling, a dream life in a Manhattan penthouse turned into a living nightmare. When a sudden medical emergency sends her to an exclusive clinic, she is given the most devastating news a mother can hear. But in the depths of her grief, a tiny flutter of life, a gut feeling she can't ignore, tells her something is wrong. She was told her baby was gone. Her body and her instincts told her otherwise. This is the story of how one woman, armed with nothing but a secret recording and a mother's intuition, took on a powerful conspiracy to save the life of her unborn child. The city of New York glittered below their penthouse apartment like a carpet of scattered diamonds. From the 62nd floor of the Orion Tower on Central Park West, Elara Vance could watch the entire world unfold. The yellow cabs flowed like blood cells through the city's arteries. The park itself was a vast, dark, lung-breathing life into the concrete metropolis, and the distant hum of sirens was the city's constant rhythmic heartbeat. This was Damian Sterling's world, and by extension, it had become hers. Their life was a meticulously curated masterpiece of modern wealth. Damian, the founder and CEO of Sterling Dynamics, was a titan of the tech industry, a man whose ambition was as vast and imposing as the skyline outside their floor-to-ceiling windows. He had courted Elara with the same single-minded intensity he applied to a corporate takeover. She, a sharp and respected investigative journalist who had once specialized in unearthing corporate malfeasance, found herself captivated by his charisma, his piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through her defenses, and the sheer force of his presence. He had promised her the world, and he had delivered it on a platinum platter. Now, at 7 months pregnant, Elara was carrying the heir to that world. A son. Damian had been ecstatic when they found out. He'd thrown a lavish party, flying in a Michelin star chef from Paris and filling their apartment with orchids and champagne. He'd held her close that night, his hand resting on her burgeoning belly, and whispered, "Everything I do, Elara, is for us, for our family, to build a legacy for him." But in the last few weeks, a subtle chill had crept into their gilded cage. It started after Damian's trip to Tokyo. He was in the final critical stages of a merger with Tanaka Heavy Industries, a colossal Japanese conglomerate. The deal was worth billions and would cement Sterling Dynamics as an untouchable global power. When he returned, the easy warmth in his eyes had been replaced by a strained, calculating focus. He was more distracted, his phone perpetually buzzing with encrypted messages. His nights spent pacing the length of their apartment, a glass of scotch in his hand. "Is everything okay with the merger?" Elara had asked one evening, rubbing the spot on her lower back that had begun to ache. Damian had stopped his pacing and forced a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's the deal of a lifetime, Ellie. That means lifetime pressure. Kenji Tanaka is traditional. He values stability above all else. Everything has to be perfect." He'd walked over and placed a cool hand on her stomach. "And soon it will be." His talk of perfection had begun to feel less like a promise and more like a threat. He became obsessed with her pregnancy. He'd overridden her choice of a well-regarded obstetrician at Mount Sinai, insisting she see his personal recommendation, a man named Dr. Alistair Finch, whose private clinic on the Upper East Side catered exclusively to the city's elite. The clinic was sleek and sterile, more like a luxury spa than a medical facility. And Dr. Finch, with his tailored suits and reassuringly deep voice, seemed more like a wealth manager than a physician. "Only the best for you and our son." Damien had said, and Elara, wanting to believe in his devotion, had acquiesced. The first real tremor of fear struck on a Tuesday night. Elara was reading in bed when a sharp, unfamiliar cramp seized her abdomen. It was brief, but intense enough to make her gasp. She tried to tell herself it was just Braxton Hicks, her body preparing for the main event. But a knot of anxiety tightened in her chest. She felt for the baby, for the familiar flutter or kick that had become her constant source of comfort. But there was only a tense stillness. She mentioned it to Damien when he came to bed an hour later, reeking faintly of expensive whiskey and boardroom tension. His reaction was immediate, and in hindsight, disproportionate. The carefully controlled mask of the CEO slipped, revealing a raw, almost feral panic. "A cramp. How bad have you been bleeding?" He demanded, his hands hovering over her belly, as if he were afraid to touch her. "No, nothing like that. It's gone now. I got scared for a second." She tried to reassure him, but his panic was contagious. "No, we're not taking any chances," he declared, already pulling on his clothes. "I'm calling Dr. Finch. We're going to the clinic, now." "Damien, it's almost midnight," Elara protested, feeling a surge of exhaustion. "I'm sure it's nothing. We can call in the morning." "No," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "We're going." The drive to the clinic was a blur of rain-slicked streets and tense silence. Damien gripped the steering wheel of his Tesla. His jaw clenched. Elara tried to focus on her breathing, sending silent, desperate reassurances to the little life inside her. "It's okay. We're okay. Daddy's just worried, Doctor." Finch's clinic was eerily silent and dim when they arrived. A single nurse, a young woman with tired eyes who introduced herself as Lena, led them directly to an examination room. Dr. Finch was waiting, looking as if he had been pulled from a deep sleep, though his suit was as always immaculate. "Damien, Mrs. Sterling," he said, his professional calm doing little to soothe the frantic energy radiating from her husband. "Let's take a look and see what's going on." Elara lay down on the examination table, the paper crinkling beneath her. The room felt cold, sterile. Damien stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder, but his touch felt proprietary, not comforting. Lena squirted the cold gel onto her stomach, and Dr. Finch began to move the ultrasound transducer over her skin. The silence in the room stretched into an eternity. On the screen, the familiar grainy black and white image of her womb appeared. Elara held her breath, searching for the tiny flickering pulse of light that she knew so well. The rhythmic beat that had become the soundtrack to her life. But she saw nothing. Dr. Finch moved the wand back and forth, his brow furrowed in concentration. The silence deepened, pressing in on Elara, thick and suffocating. She looked at Damien's face, which was a mask of strained concern. She looked at the nurse, Lena, who was staring intently at the screen, her own face pale. Finally, Dr. Finch sighed, a heavy theatrical sound that seemed to suck all the air from the room. He pulled the transducer away and wiped the gel from her stomach with a practiced, detached motion. He turned to her, his expression a perfect symphony of clinical sympathy. "Elara," he began, his voice soft but firm. "I'm so sorry." The words hung in the air, unreal and monstrous. "There's no heartbeat." Elara's world fractured. A roaring sound filled her ears, drowning out everything else. No, it wasn't possible. She had felt him move that very morning, a strong, definitive kick to her ribs as she was getting dressed. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, you're wrong. Check again. Please." Damien's grip on her shoulder tightened. "Ellie, darling," he murmured, his voice thick with what sounded like grief. "Please," she begged Dr. Finch, tears now streaming down her face, blurring his composed features into a watercolor smudge. "He was kicking this morning. I felt him." Dr. Finch gave her a pitying look, the kind one gives to a hysterical child. "Elara, at this stage, the absence of a heartbeat is conclusive. The fetus is no longer viable. You've had what we call a missed miscarriage. The body hasn't expelled the pregnancy yet, but the life is gone." Each word was a physical blow. The life is gone. The phrase echoed in the hollow space that had just opened inside her. She felt Damien's arms wrap around her, pulling her into a hug that felt more like a restraint. She sobbed into his chest, her body racked with a grief so profound it felt like a physical tearing. Through her storm of sorrow, Dr. Finch's voice cut through, calm and authoritative. "The most important thing now is to think about your health, Elara. We need to schedule a dilation and curettage procedure, a D&C, to remove the uterine contents and prevent any risk of infection or complications." "A procedure," she mumbled, her mind struggling to process the information through the fog of pain. "It's standard practice. We should do it as soon as possible. Tomorrow, if I can clear my schedule," Dr. Finch said, already glancing at a tablet held by the nurse. "Yes," Damien said immediately, his voice decisive. "Yes, whatever is best. We'll do it tomorrow. Book it, Alistair." Something in his quick agreement, his rush to fix the problem, snagged on the raw edge of her grief. A tiny discordant note in a symphony of sorrow. But she was too broken to question it. She was drowning, and the two men in the room were her only life rafts. She nodded numbly, allowing them to make the decisions to steer her through the wreckage of her world. They led her from the clinic like a sleepwalker, her mind a blank slate of shock and agony. The drive home was a mirror of the drive there, but this time the silence wasn't tense. It was funereal. The city lights mocking her with their indifferent brilliance. Her son was gone. The legacy Damien wanted to build had crumbled to dust before it had even begun. In the depths of her despair, she accepted it. She accepted the diagnosis, the pitying looks, the need for a procedure to erase the final traces of the life she had lost. She had no reason to doubt them. Not yet. The penthouse, once a symbol of her fairy tale life, had become a mausoleum. Every object was imbued with a ghostly presence. The tiny unopened box from Bergdorf's containing a pair of cashmere booties sat on the marble countertop like a miniature tombstone. The half-assembled crib in the nursery, a masterpiece of Scandinavian design that Damien had insisted on, loomed in the shadows of the doorway, a skeletal reminder of a future that had been stolen. Damien was the perfect caricature of a grieving husband. He moved through the apartment with a somber hush, speaking in funereal whispers. He brought her chamomile tea she didn't drink, and covered her with cashmere throws she didn't need. He answered the flood of calls from concerned friends and business associates with a beautifully tragic performance. "We're devastated," he'd say, his voice cracking with expertly modulated pain. "A terrible, terrible loss. Elara is resting. It's been a shock to her system." He was managing the situation. That's what it felt like. Not mourning, but managing. He was controlling the narrative, just as he controlled every other aspect of their lives. When Elara would break down into fresh waves of sobs, he would hold her, but his embrace felt scripted. He would murmur platitudes about their strength, about how they would get through this together. but his eyes were distant, already focused on the next step. The next action item on his list, the D&C. "The clinic called," he said softly on the afternoon before the scheduled procedure. He found her standing at the window, staring blankly at the unceasing river of traffic below. "Everything is set for 10 a.m. Dr. Finch has cleared his morning for you. He sends his deepest sympathies." "I don't want to go," Elara whispered, her voice raw. The thought of the cold, sterile room of the final clinical removal of her son sent a fresh spear of agony through her. Damien's face hardened for a fraction of a second before the mask of sympathy slid back into place. "Ellie, darling, we have to." "Doctor, Finch was very clear about the risk of infection. This is for your health now. It's the only way to move forward." Move forward. The phrase echoed in the empty chambers of her heart. How could she move forward when a part of her was being left behind, discarded as medical waste? That night, sleep was an impossibility. Damien, claiming he needed to deal with some urgent fallout from postponing his meetings, took a call in his study. The heavy oak door closed with a definitive click, sealing her into the cavernous silence of their bedroom. Alone, Elara curled on her side, one hand resting protectively on her still swollen belly. It felt like a cruel mockery, this physical evidence of a life that was no more. She thought of the name they had chosen Noah. It meant rest and comfort. She had loved the gentle strength of it. She whispered it into the darkness of final heartbreaking farewell. "Noah, oh Noah, my sweet boy, I'm so sorry. I love you so much." Tears rolled down her temples and into her hair. She pressed her palm harder against her skin, trying to memorize the feeling of the round, firm globe of her womb, the last physical connection she had to her son. And then it happened. It wasn't a gas bubble. It wasn't a muscle spasm or a phantom sensation born of desperate grief. It was a clear, distinct, and utterly undeniable movement. A little foot or an elbow rolling with purpose from one side of her uterus to the other. It was followed by a sharp, staccato thump-thump right against her palm. Elara froze her entire body, going rigid. The tears stopped. Her breath hitched in her throat. Her heart, which had been beating with a slow, mournful rhythm, suddenly began to hammer against her ribs. She waited every nerve ending alive, with a terrifying, electrifying hope. For a full minute there was nothing but the sound of her own frantic pulse in her ears. Did I imagine it? Am I losing my mind? And then another one. A solid, insistent kick high up near her ribs, the same spot he always kicked in the morning. It was real. The sensation was so powerful, so irrefutably alive, that it was like a bucket of ice water thrown on the fire of her grief. The sorrow didn't vanish, but it was instantly superseded by something else, something cold and sharp and dangerous clarity. Her mind, the analytical, investigative mind she had honed for years, roared to life. It began to slice through the fog of the last 24 hours, re-examining every detail with a terrifying new lens. The cramp. A single minor cramp. Not bleeding, no other symptoms. Was that truly enough to warrant a midnight rush to a clinic across town? Or was it merely the perfect pretext? The clinic. It had been empty. Utterly deserted, save for Dr. Finch and that one pale, nervous nurse. A high-end clinic on the Upper East Side on a Tuesday night should have had some staff. A receptionist, another doctor on call security. But it had been a ghost town prepared and waiting just for them. The diagnosis. Dr. Finch had been so quick, so certain. He'd barely looked at the screen before pronouncing the death sentence. The absence of a heartbeat is conclusive. But was it? Had he even tried to find it? Or had he simply known what he was supposed to say? The DNC. The rush. Damien's immediate, forceful agreement. Book it, Alistair. Not, are you sure? Not, can we wait and see? Just an immediate executive decision to remove the uterine contents, as if her son were a problematic line item on a balance sheet. And then the final damning piece clicked into place. Damien's words from the other night. Kenji Tanaka is traditional. He values stability above all else. Everything has to be perfect. A baby and heir should have been the very definition of stability. Unless the timing was wrong. A high-risk pregnancy, a demanding newborn. A wife whose attention was diverted from her role as the perfect corporate spouse during the most critical months of a multi-billion-dollar merger. Was that the imperfection Damien was so desperate to eliminate? The thought was so monstrous, so utterly evil, that Alara felt a wave of nausea. Could the man she loved, the father of her child, orchestrate a lie of such profound cruelty? Could he pay a doctor to pronounce their own son dead just to smooth the path for a business deal? She looked at her belly, at the spot where she could still feel the faint stirrings of life. The answer was a horrifying, soul-crushing yes. They weren't trying to help her recover from a miscarriage. They were planning to cause one. The DNC scheduled for 10 a.m. wasn't a medical necessity. It was an execution. A new feeling washed over her, eclipsing the grief and the shock. It was a cold, primal fury, the protective instinct of a mother bear whose cub is threatened. They had made a fatal error. They had underestimated her. They thought she was a fragile, grieving doll they could manipulate. They were wrong. She knew she couldn't confront them. Damien would dismiss her as hysterical. He would call Dr. Finch, who would calmly explain that phantom kicks were a common symptom of denial. They would sedate her for her own good and wheel her into that operating room. They would stop her son's heart, and no one would ever know. She needed proof. Undeniable, irrefutable proof. And then she remembered. Julian Croft, her oldest friend, a man who lived and breathed in the digital world of cybersecurity and counter-surveillance. They had worked together on an expose years ago. For her birthday last year, he had given her a gag gift that was also deeply practical for a journalist. It was a Mont Blanc fountain pen, elegant and weighty. "It's beautiful," she'd said. "But be careful," he'd winked. "The nib is mightier than the sword, and this one has a microphone that could pick up a whisper in a wind tunnel." She scrambled out of bed and went to her home office. Her hands shook as she rummaged through her desk drawer, past branded stationery and personalized thank you cards. There it was, nestled in its velvet box. The pen. Her weapon. Her mind was racing a plan forming out of the chaos. She had two objectives. First, she needed absolute independent confirmation that her baby was alive. Second, she needed to get Damien and Dr. Finch to incriminate themselves. She took a deep, steadying breath. The time for tears was over. It was time for war. She picked up her phone, and composing her voice to sound weak and resigned, she called Dr. Finch's 24-hour service. When the on-call nurse answered, Alara said, "This is Alara Sterling. Please leave a message for Dr. Finch. I just want to confirm my procedure for 10 a.m. I'm ready to put this behind me." Hanging up, she turned to her laptop. She didn't search for top-rated obstetricians or well-known hospitals. She searched for small, private, cash-only women's health clinics. She found one that looked promising, the Astoria Women's Wellness Center in Queens. It was run by a Dr. Maria Ortiz and had grainy, outdated photos on its website. It was perfect. It was a world away from Damian Sterling's sphere of influence. She booked the earliest available appointment for the next morning, 8 a.m., under the name Anna Smith. She would take a car service, not her own driver. She would pay in cash withdrawn from an ATM, not a credit card Damian could track. She would go there, get her proof on an ultrasound printout, and then she would walk into Dr. Finch's office for her 10 a.m. appointment. Not for a D&C, but for a final recorded performance. She would play the broken-hearted wife one last time, and she would get them to admit what they had done. She would let them bury themselves. Clutching the cold, heavy pen in her hand, Elara felt the last of her old self. The trusting wife, the pampered socialite fall away. In her place stood a journalist with the story of a lifetime and a mother with everything to fight for. The first light of dawn bled across the sky, turning the glass towers of Manhattan a soft, bruised purple. Elara had not slept. She had sat in the dark, watching the city awaken the spy pen, a cold, hard promise in her hand. Every so often, a gentle roll or a soft thump from within would reaffirm her purpose, stoking the fires of her righteous fury. Damian emerged from his study just after 6, his hair slightly disheveled, his suit jacket slung over a chair. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. He was in full crisis management mode. "Ellie," he said, his voice a soft performance of concern. "You're up early." "I couldn't sleep," she replied. Her own voice a carefully crafted instrument of fragile grief. She kept her face turned towards the window, unwilling to meet his gaze, afraid he might see the storm brewing behind her eyes. "I know, darling. I know. It will be better after today. Once we can start to heal properly," he said, coming up behind her and placing his hands on her shoulders. His touch felt like a spider's caress, and she had to fight the urge to flinch. This was her first test, getting out of the apartment alone. She took a slow, shaky breath. "Damian, before we go to the clinic, there's something I need to do." "Anything, Ellie. What is it?" "The Church of St. Ignatius Loyola is just a few blocks from Dr. Finch's office." She began naming a place she knew he'd find suitably dramatic and respectable. "I want to go there first, alone, just to sit for a while. To say a prayer, a goodbye." She let her voice crack on the last word, a touch of theatricality she had learned from him. He was silent for a moment. She could feel the gears turning in his head as he assessed her request. It fit the profile of a grieving wife perfectly. It was pious, private, and posed no threat. "Of course," he said, his grip on her shoulders softening into what he intended as a comforting squeeze. "Of course you can. Take all the time you need. I'll have our driver Michael take you. I'll meet you at Dr. Finch's office at 10. "No," she said a little too quickly, then softened her tone. "No, please. No driver. I don't want to be fussed over. I just want to be anonymous. I'll take a car service. It's better that way." Another brief calculation, another concession. "All right, Elara, if that's what you need. Just be careful." The words were right, but the tone was that of a man granting a small final request before a business transaction. An hour later, she was in the back of a generic black Uber, heading not east towards Park Avenue, but across the Queensboro Bridge. She watched the glittering spires of Manhattan recede in the rearview mirror, feeling as though she were crossing the river Styx into another realm. She was leaving the land of the powerful and the privileged, the world that Damien Sterling owned, and entering the real world. The Astoria Women's Wellness Center was located on the second floor of a brick building, nestled between a laundromat and a bakery that filled the air with the warm, honest smell of fresh bread. The waiting room was small and cluttered with mismatched chairs, a stack of well-worn magazines, and a potted plant that had seen better days. Yet it was filled with a quiet, unassuming warmth that Dr. Finch's sterile, art-curated lobby could never possess. A kind-faced woman with a thick Greek accent took down her fake name, Anna Smith, and accepted the wad of cash Elara gave her without a second glance. After a short wait, a woman in her late 60s with graying hair, pulled back in a loose bun, and warm, intelligent eyes emerged. "Anna, I'm Dr. Ortiz. Come on back." The examination room was as humble as the rest of the clinic. The equipment was older, the paint was slightly chipped, but it was immaculately clean. Dr. Ortiz's manner was direct and reassuring. "So you're about 30 weeks, you said. Just want a checkup to see how the little one is doing?" the doctor asked as Elara lay on the table. Elara's heart was pounding so hard, she was sure Dr. Ortiz could see it pulsing in her neck. Her hands were ice cold. This was the moment of truth. What if by some cruel twist of fate, Dr. Finch had been right? What if the kicks she felt were just phantom death throes? What if her entire rebellion was built on a foundation of grief-stricken madness? "Something wrong?" Dr. Ortiz asked, noticing her terror. "I'm just anxious," Elara whispered. The doctor gave her a knowing smile. "First-time mums, you worry about everything. Let's take a look. This gel is a bit cold, dear." Dr. Ortiz was efficient. She moved the transducer over Elara's belly, her eyes scanning the monitor. For a horrifying second, the screen showed the same empty gray landscape Dr. Finch had shown her. Elara's breath caught in a silent scream. But then Dr. Ortiz adjusted the angle, and there he was. Perfect. He was curled up, a tiny thumb drifting near his mouth. She could see the elegant curve of his spine, the shape of his head, the delicate limbs. He was not a collection of uterine contents. He was a person. "Okay, looking good," Dr. Ortiz said cheerfully. "Size is right on track. Plenty of fluid." She flipped a switch. "And let's listen to the best sound in the world." The room was suddenly filled with a loud, strong, rhythmic drumming. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. It was the most beautiful sound Elara had ever heard. It was the sound of life, the sound of truth, the sound of Damien's unforgivable lie. Tears streamed from Elara's eyes, but they were not the tears of grief she had cried before. These were tears of profound, soul-shaking relief, immediately followed by a surge of glacial rage, so intense it made her dizzy. Dr. Ortiz, mistaking her tears for simple joy, beamed. There he is, a strong, steady 150 beats per minute, a perfect little athlete. She printed out a grainy thermal image from the machine. "Here you go, Mama, a picture for the baby book." Elara took the flimsy piece of paper, clutching it in her hand. It was her shield, her proof, her declaration of war. Is there any reason?" Elara asked, her voice tight, that someone might not be able to find that heartbeat. Dr. Ortiz frowned, considering the question. "Well, if the equipment is very old, or the operator is inexperienced, maybe, or if the baby is in a very awkward position early on. But at this stage, With modern equipment, you'd have to be actively trying not to find it. It's right there. Why do you ask? No reason, Elara said. Sitting up, a friend of a friend had a scare. Thank you, doctor. You have no idea what this means to me. She practically fled the clinic, her mission accomplished. Out on the bustling Queen's Street, the world looked sharper, more vibrant. The smell of the bakery, the chatter of people on the sidewalk, the rumble of the elevated train. It was all part of a world her son deserved to be born into. She hailed a yellow cab, the most anonymous transport of all. Upper East Side, she said to the driver, her voice steady and clear. 76th and Park. As the cab merged onto the bridge, heading back into the belly of the beast, Elara reached into her purse. She took out the elegant Mont Blanc pen. She found the minuscule, nearly invisible button on the silver clip and pressed it for 3 seconds. A tiny blue light blinked once and then went dark. It was active. It was recording. She rehearsed her lines, her questions. She thought about Damien's face, about Dr. Finch's condescending sympathy. The image of the ultrasound, the sound of the heartbeat, were burned into her mind. There was no more fear, no more doubt. When the cab pulled up in front of the gleaming limestone building that housed Dr. Finch's clinic, Elara felt a profound and chilling calm settle over her. She was no longer Elara Vance, the billionaire's wife. She was an instrument of justice. She paid the driver, stepped onto the polished marble sidewalk, and walked through the heavy glass doors. The waiting room was, as she expected, empty and silent. A single receptionist, not the nervous nurse from the other night, sat behind a large desk. I'm Elara Sterling, she said. I have a 10 o'clock appointment with Dr. Finch. The nurse led Elara not to a cold, sterile examination room, but to Dr. Finch's private office. The room was a testament to his success, a chamber of quiet power. Walls paneled in dark mahogany were adorned with abstract art and framed degrees. A large, formidable desk of polished walnut stood between Elara and the high-backed leather chair where the doctor would sit in judgment. It wasn't a room for healing. It was a room for closing deals. She was being managed. She sat in one of the 2 smaller chairs facing the desk, placing her leather handbag on the floor beside her. She took out the Mont Blanc pen and a small leather-bound notebook, as if she might need to jot down some final mournful thoughts. She placed the pen carefully on the polished surface of the desk, orienting its nib towards the center. The tiny, nearly invisible microphone had a clear line to the entire room. Dr. Finch entered first, closing the door softly behind him. He wore a charcoal suit and an expression of deep solemnity. He looked less like a doctor and more like a high-end funeral director. Elara, he said, his voice a low, comforting hum. I'm glad you came in. It's important we talk before the procedure. Make sure you're feeling as comfortable as possible. He sat behind his desk, folding his hands. The picture of authority. A moment later, the door opened again, and Damien walked in. He had changed into a somber navy blue sweater, the picture of a devoted, grieving husband. He came over to Elara, bent down and kissed her forehead. It was a cold, dry kiss. Darling, are you all right? He murmured, pulling the second chair closer to hers. He was positioning himself as her guardian, her protector. The 2 of them a united front of male authority, facing the fragile woman. They had no idea the roles were reversed. Elara took a shaky breath, summoning the ghost of the broken woman she had been 2 days ago. I'm trying to be, she said, her voice small and unsteady. I just have some questions. My mind keeps going around in circles. I think I need to understand just for my own peace of mind before we go ahead." Dr. Finch leaned forward, his expression softening into one of patronizing empathy. "Of course, Elara. Anything at all. It's a natural part of the grieving process." This was it. The performance began. The ultrasound. She started looking at Finch, her eyes wide with feigned confusion. It all happened so fast. Was there really nothing? Not even a flicker. I know it sounds crazy, but sometimes I still think I can feel him moving. Is that normal? Am I imagining it? Dr. Finch gave a small, sad smile. The phantom limb phenomenon, but for pregnancy. It's more common than you think, Elara. The mind is a powerful thing. It can create sensations, especially when a loss is this profound. I assure you what I saw on the screen was unequivocal. There was no cardiac activity. The fetal demise was unfortunately absolute. He delivered the lines with such practiced, compassionate authority. It was almost believable. He was good. But Elara had the truth on a flimsy piece of thermal paper in her purse. "It's just, you were so certain so fast," she pressed, letting a tear roll down her cheek. She didn't bother to wipe it away. It felt like there was no hope. In these situations, giving false hope is the cruelest thing a doctor can do, Finch said smoothly. "My job is to give you the facts as difficult as they may be." She let the silence hang for a moment. Then she turned her gaze to her husband. His face was a mask of pained support. It was time to spring the trap. "Damien," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You were so stressed that night. I know the merger has been all-consuming." She paused as if gathering her thoughts. "I remember before we rushed to the clinic, you were on the phone. I think it was with Dr. Finch. I heard you say that something was absolutely critical for the Tanaka deal. I didn't understand it, then I was so focused on the cramp. Was my pregnancy causing problems for the merger?" It was a perfectly delivered blow disguised as a grief-addled, nonsensical question. The effect was instantaneous, a barely perceptible tightening in Damien's jaw, a flicker, just a flicker in Dr. Finch's calm, sympathetic eyes. They exchanged a glance, so fleeting that if she hadn't been looking for it, she would have missed it. It was a glance of shared conspiracy of two men checking their stories were aligned. The pen on the desk recorded the silence. "Darling," Damien said, reaching over to take her hand. His was cold as ice. "You're getting confused. Grief does that to your memory. Of course the deal is stressful, but that has nothing to do with us, with our son. We wanted him more than anything in this world, you know that." "But did Mr. Tanaka know?" Elara pushed, gently playing the part of the confused wife perfectly. "You never mentioned telling him. You were always so proud. I thought you would have told him we were expecting your first son. A legacy. Isn't that the kind of stability he values?" This was the corner. Damien's face went blank. He couldn't say he had told Tanaka because Tanaka would be expecting a baby. He had to admit he'd kept it a secret. His silence was an answer in itself. Dr. Finch, ever the helpful fixer, saw Damien floundering and stepped in to clarify. It was the fatal mistake she had been counting on. "Elara," the doctor began, leaning forward as if sharing a gentle confidence. "What your husband is trying to navigate is a very delicate, high-stakes cultural negotiation. The timing of the pregnancy, while a joyous event for you both, was medically and logistically unfortunate." "Unfortunate?" Elara echoed, her voice trembling. "Mr. Tanaka and his board, They are from a different generation, a different culture, Finch continued, warming to his theme, digging his own grave deeper with every word. They are investing billions based on their perception of Damien's absolute focus. A complicated pregnancy, a newborn in the house during the final integration phase. It could be seen as a significant distraction, a liability. They want stability, and a new baby, paradoxically, can be a period of intense instability. The blood in Ilara's veins turned to ice. He was admitting it. He was giving her the motive on a silver platter. Damien, seeing the opening Finch had created, decided to reclaim control, to frame their monstrous act as a noble sacrifice. "He's right, Ellie," Damien said, his voice now firm, decisive. "The CEO taking charge. This wasn't about not wanting our son. God, no. It was about securing his future. Our future. This merger with Tanaka, it isn't just a deal. It's the foundation of a dynasty. It ensures that our son and his children would want for nothing. A delay of a year, just to get us past this critical phase. It was a practical decision." He said the words, the ones that would seal his doom. "A practical decision," Ilara whispered, her voice breaking with real, unfeigned horror. "A sacrifice for the greater good." Damien insisted, his eyes blazing with self-righteous conviction. "It was the hardest decision of my life. But it was necessary." Alistair understood the stakes. He agreed to help us, to manage the situation for the time being. Manage the situation. The final nail. The confirmation of the conspiracy. The payment, the entire sordid, evil plot, all confessed and recorded in crystal clear high fidelity. Ilara had everything. She broke. But it was not the brokenness they thought. It was the shattering of a dam, releasing a flood of calculated action. She let out a sob, a raw, wrenching sound that was only half acting. She snatched the pen and her notebook from the desk, shoving them into her purse. "I can't," she gasped, standing up so quickly her chair scraped against the hardwood floor. "I can't do this." "Ellie, wait," Damien said, rising. "The procedure," Dr. Finch began. "Ilara, we should—" "I need some air," she choked out, fumbling with the strap of her handbag. She didn't look at them. She fled. She burst out of the office, past the startled receptionist, and into the silent, empty waiting room. She didn't wait for the elevator. She pushed through the heavy door to the fire stairs, her heels clattering down the concrete steps. She ran, fueled by adrenaline and a terrifying, triumphant rage. Out on the street, the cool morning air hit her face. The city was bustling, indifferent. A yellow cab was idling at the curb. She yanked the door open and threw herself inside. "Go," she said to the driver. "Just drive." As the cab pulled away from the curb, leaving the limestone facade of the clinic behind her, she saw Damien and Dr. Finch appear on the steps, their faces a mixture of confusion and annoyance. They thought they were dealing with a hysterical woman who had bolted. They had no idea they were watching their entire world begin to burn. Ilara leaned back against the worn vinyl seat, her heart hammering. She pulled her phone from her purse, her fingers flying across the screen. She had one call to make. Julian Croft answered on the first ring. "Julian," she said, her voice shaking, but clear as a bell. "I've got it. I've got everything." In the back of the cab, a prisoner of war who had just liberated herself. Ilara Vance clutched the pen that held the ruin of two powerful men and the future of the son they had tried to erase. The taxi ride was a meaningless blur of city blocks. Ilara fed the driver a series of random turns, a crude attempt at counter-surveillance, her journalistic instincts taking over. Finally, she directed him to a small, unassuming coffee shop in the West Village, a place she and Julian had used as a neutral meeting point years ago. She paid in cash, leaving a generous tip, then walked out and immediately hailed a different cab. Only then did she give the real address, a pre-war building in Tudor City, an oasis of Gothic revival architecture overlooking the East River. Julian Croft didn't live there. It was one of his many citadels, as he called them. Safe, anonymous apartments he kept scattered across the city, paid for in cash under shell LLCs, outfitted with their own fiber-optic lines and layers of digital and physical security. He met her in the lobby, looking nothing like a master hacker. Dressed in a faded band t-shirt and jeans with wire-rimmed glasses perched on his nose, he looked more like a grad student who'd just rolled out of bed. But his eyes were sharp and missed nothing. He took her arm quietly, his grip firm and reassuring, and led her not to the main elevators, but to a service elevator in the back of the lobby. He used a physical key, not a key card, to access it. "Smaller digital footprint," he murmured, answering her unasked question. The apartment was Spartan but functional. The main room was dominated by a bank of computer monitors, displaying scrolling lines of code network traffic maps and encrypted communication streams. The windows were covered with a special film that prevented electronic eavesdropping. This was Julian's real office. "Give it to me," he said, his tone all business. Her hand shook as she gave him the Mont Blanc pen. Julian handled it with the delicate precision of a bomb disposal expert. He didn't plug it into his main system. Instead, he connected it via a shielded cable to an air-gapped offline laptop on a separate table. "Let's see what the bastards had to say," he said grimly. He started the data transfer. A progress bar crawled across the screen. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the low hum of the servers. Elara paced the floor, her hand resting protectively on her belly. She felt the baby kick a small reassurance that all of this was real, that her fight was justified. Finally, the file was secure. Julian unplugged the pen and slid the laptop over to his main desk, connecting it to a set of high-fidelity speakers. "Ready?" he asked, looking at her. She nodded, bracing herself. He hit play. Dr. Finch's voice filled the room, a smooth, condescending baritone. A natural part of the grieving process. Then her own voice, small and trembling. "Sometimes I still think I can feel him moving." Hearing it was a surreal, out-of-body experience. She listened to Finch's confident dismissal of her son's life. The fetal demise was, unfortunately, absolute, and felt a fresh wave of rage. Then came Damien's voice, the voice that had once whispered promises of love in her ear, now pragmatic and monstrously cold. It was a practical decision, a sacrifice for the greater good. Alistair understood the stakes. He agreed to help us, to manage the situation for the time being. When the recording ended, the silence that returned was heavier, darker. Julian slowly took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes, a rare sign of distress. "Christ, Ellie," he whispered. "I've uncovered corporate espionage rings, government black ops. But this is a special kind of monster." He got up and walked over to her. What they were going to do. It's not just malpractice. It's conspiracy to commit murder. Attempt. "I know," she said, her voice hard. "And now we have them." "Not so fast," Julian warned, his analytical brain clicking back into gear. "Having the tape is one thing. Using it is another." Damien Sterling isn't just rich, he's powerful. He has judges on his payroll, politicians in his pocket. We walk into the nearest police precinct with this, and by morning, the tape will be lost. You'll be painted as an unstable, hysterical wife, suing for a bigger divorce settlement, and you'll find yourself on a psychiatric hold. He'll use his power to crush you. The cold reality of Julian's words hit her. He was right. Damien wouldn't fight fair. He would fight to win by any means necessary. So what do we do? Elara asked, her hope wavering. We don't play his game, Julian said, his eyes lighting up with intensity. We create a new one. We can't use the system he controls, so we go public. We detonate this in the court of public opinion so loudly and so devastatingly that the system has no choice but to act. We have to create a firestorm he can't possibly control. Elara, the journalist, understood immediately. The media! Exactly, but the right media. Someone with unimpeachable credibility and a massive platform. Someone who won't be threatened or bought. A name immediately came to her mind. A man who was both a legend and a terror in her former profession. Ronan Slate, a Pulitzer-winning investigative reporter for the New York Ledger, the city's last great newspaper. Slate was an old-school bloodhound who had taken down senators and CEOs with his relentless, fact-based reporting. He was brilliant, terrifying, and incorruptible. Ronan Slate, she said. Julian gave a sharp nod of approval. Perfect. Slate doesn't just report a story. He becomes the story. If he runs with this, it's not just an article. It's a global event. While they were planning, Damien was already reacting. Back in the Orion Tower penthouse, his initial confusion had curdled into a cold dread. Elara wasn't answering her phone. He'd had his security team check her credit cards. The only transaction was a small one at a West Village coffee shop hours ago. She had gone to ground. She knew. He paced his office like a caged panther. He called his head of security, an ex-Mossad agent named Gavriel. Find her, Damien ordered, his voice laced with venom. I want her location. I want her communications monitored. I want to know who she's talking to. Now. Then he made a second call to his lead attorney at the city's most powerful law firm. We have a potential situation with my wife, he said, the corporate euphemism tasting like ash. I need you to prepare a full-scale assault, character assassination, psychological evaluations, restraining orders. I want everything ready to deploy on my signal. The narrative will be that she is having a severe mental breakdown from the trauma of the miscarriage and is a danger to herself and others. He was building his walls, preparing his weapons. He had underestimated Elara's resourcefulness, but he would never underestimate the power of a well-funded and ruthless counteroffensive. Back in Julian's digital fortress, Elara knew the clock was ticking. She had to move before Damien could frame the narrative. Julian was already making copies of the audio file, securing it in a dozen encrypted cloud servers around the world, and setting up a secure line for her to use. Are you ready to do this? Julian asked her, his hand hovering over the keyboard. Once you make this call, there's no going back. This is all-out war. Elara looked down at her belly, where the son Damien had condemned to death was safe and alive. She thought of the cold kiss on her forehead, of the monstrous lie in his eyes. Her fear was gone, burned away by a cold and righteous certainty. I was made for this war, she said. Julian initiated the secure, untraceable call. Elara took the receiver. On the other end of the line, in the loud, chaotic newsroom of the New York Ledger, Ronan Slate picked up his phone. "Slate?" he barked into the receiver. "Ronan," Elara said, her voice steady and clear. "It's Elara Vance. We met a few years ago at the Polk Awards. I have a story for you. It's about my husband, Damien Sterling." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Slate was famously unembarrassed by big names. "I don't do society gossip, Vance." "This isn't gossip, Ronan," Elara said, her voice dropping to a steel whisper. "It's conspiracy to commit murder, and I have it on tape." The line was silent for a beat. She could almost hear the old reporter's ears prick up, could picture him leaning forward in his chair, the scent of a kill in the air. "I'm listening," Ronan Slate said. The first shot had been fired. Elara Vance's recording, unleashed upon the world by the press, created a firestorm that not even a billionaire could control. The story became a global symbol of the fight against hidden corruption and the incredible power of a mother's will. Damien Sterling's empire, built on ambition and deceit, crumbled under the weight of his own words. Dr. Finch lost his license, his reputation, and his freedom. But for Elara, the victory wasn't in their downfall. It was in the quiet moments months later when she could hold her son Noah in her arms, feeling the steady, real beat of his heart against her chest. Her story is a testament to the fact that no matter how deeply it's buried, the truth will always find its way to the light, and that sometimes the most powerful force in the world isn't money or influence, but a love that refuses to let go. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please hit the like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more incredible true stories.